many people don't deserve to have power because they concentrate power and wealth to themselves, and then they abuse the rest of the citizens. That's a matter for Bible believers to comment on. So I have a special guest, Professor Augusto Zimmermann, whose long list of credentials would take, the whole program to talk about, but he's well known on TV here in Australia, his frequent guest. He's a contributor to The Spectator, the Epoch Times. He's a law professor, a constitutional law expert, and he's starting a law school, which I'm sure you can tell us a little bit about for the future law students. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yes, indeed. We are implementing a project of creating a Christian law school here in Western Australia. We have obtained the approval of TAXA, but we still need the approval of the Legal Practice Board. So that's why you guys should be praying for us, because it's an important idea, an important project, so desperately needed in this country, especially after this election and the outcome, and the undermining of fundamental rights and freedoms that are taking place almost on a daily basis in this country. We need to have more Christians and more, like-minded people, if I can say, who are interested in upholding the rule of law and protecting the inalienable rights of the individual. And that's my whole goal in life, and that's why I became a lawyer. Not a lawyer, but a legal academic. I want to be more precise.
Sure. And you were also law commissioner for 5 years. And that actually discourages me, because you had a role in critiquing the laws and recommending changes to the law. And I think your experience is that they didn't really listen, did they?
No, and that's why I'm not a legal practitioner. I wanted to be a maker of the law, or upholding God's law, to be more precise in my approach. But, and of course, that led me to become an academic and a law reform commissioner, where I have the opportunity to protect the society against some bad ideas and changes in the legislation that would be detrimental to society. And I felt very blessed to be serving the society for 4 years here as a commissioner, 5 years actually as a commissioner.
Yeah. Now, for our YouTube family who might want to know where your accent is from, please tell us.
Yes, I was born in Brazil. I have a German background, and migrated to Australia about 22 years ago. Initially did a PhD at Monash, then ended up staying here and got further degrees from Australia. And I was invited by a wonderful academic who was then the dean of the law school at Murdoch, the law dean, to be working with him, starting as an associate lecturer and then progressing until I reached the position of associate dean for research, increasingly working on this area of research and legal research. And I have built my career now in Australia.
Awesome. So we can say you got the mind of a German and the heart of a Latino, and you got the grace of God on you. So we're so glad you're on our side.
Thank you.
And we have a lot of friends actually who watch us from Brazil. We get lots of comments on YouTube, and sometimes they're in Portuguese. I don't understand it, but it's good to have you here in Australia. And, I think the Brazilians should know that you were once nominated to be sitting on the Supreme Court of Brazil. Is that right?
There was a very serious discussion about my possible appointment in the higher levels of power. But then I end up making options of staying in Australia. I continue to give and lend my support to the Brazilian people, but we will now leave all these things in God's hands. It's certainly one of my goals in life to continue to help the Brazilians, especially now that they face a very important election. And I was so honored to actually write the blurb to your book on Trump's unfinished business. And I know that you have translation of this book into Portuguese. So I would tell my fellow Brazilian citizens that your book is more important than ever to be read, because they are facing a very crucial election, and the recommendations you made in the book are extremely important, especially at this present moment in Brazilian history, and the elections are just about to happen in October.
Comment a little bit on where are we at in Australia? Does Labor have a super majority? The Greens have gotten now 3 seats. They used to have 1. And we got these new people, which are called the Teal. They wear a teal t-shirt, and they're like even more radical on climate change than the Greens. Where are we at? Have we just completely lost our rights and freedoms here with these people winning?
Absolutely. This is a matter of great concern to anyone who has some sort of appreciation for our legal traditions and our values as well. Certainly, the fact that these independents managed to obtain such a positive result for them, it doesn't really mean that they will be fighting for the right things, because they tend to be even more radical than even the Greens, which is the most radical party we have here, a left-wing extreme party. But the liberals paved the way for the situation, not only by doing a very bad job, but undoubtedly allowing this situation to be aggravated by rendering preferential voting for these independents above even the minor freedom parties. So that's a natural outcome of this unwise decision made by the coalition.
So for non-Australians, we have this preferential voting system. It's very strange to me because they use it whatever way that suits the major parties. We have freedom-loving parties, like I'll name a few, like I think the Liberal Democrats, One Nation, United Australia, which is the Clive Palmer party. So they're rising up based on, I think there's a popular demand for greater freedom and a security of our rights. We don't have a Bill of Rights here. And you could see the protests in city after city. You know, hundreds of thousands of people support this. But yet on election day, not a single one of them won. None of the freedom parties won as far as I've seen yet. The Senate is still being counted. And I heard that Labor got in to be the government over Australia on 30% of the popular vote. How is that possible? Can you explain that to us?
It is very bizarre indeed. And the system is totally broken. And it's another evidence that we can get a party that is even less popular than the one happening to be defeated. Because it seems that in terms of number one voting, the Liberals got even more than Labor. But because of this strange system that we have, Labor ultimately got preferences from other parties, and including the Greens, and that led to the victory. So this is one of the main problems we have with the system in Australia, in this case, the electoral system. But there are other problems that I can discuss with you that are actually more disturbing than that in terms of our constitutional framework, paving the way for arbitrary government.
Okay, so you think the problem goes all the way back to our constitution. So it's not an electoral count problem. You know that Joseph Stalin said, it doesn't matter who votes. What matters is who counts the votes. And yes. You know, this is a paraphrase. So you think our electoral system and the scrutineers, you think there's integrity in that, or is there a question about this?
There is a little bit of a question about that. I can understand how you can vote without showing any sort of identification. I could vote, just mention my name and that's it, you know. So and now we have this voto posting. Another thing that disturbs me, because I'm just not so sure how this thing can be safe. We know that most of the Australians now didn't go to vote on the very day, or a substantial amount of the population didn't go on the very day to vote, but they voted prior to the date via postal voting. I really don't like this new approach. And I'm starting to be a little bit more suspicious about the use of pencil as well. You know, it's not, you don't write on using a pen, it's a pencil. And that can easily be erased. So I think we should always vote using a pen and not a pencil. And certainly the preferential voting process has proven to be rather complicated in terms of its transparency, because when you have to allocate the votes, you tend to be naturally inclined to suspect that Labor and Liberal deserve to have gotten or must have gotten more than the others. And then they just ignore the fact that the minor parties might potentially have had more votes, because this is certainly not even believed by those who are responsible for the electoral process.
What do you think is the constitutional problem with our system?
Well, look, the Americans had this belief that the judges would faithfully uphold the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So in America, they did the proper separation of powers based on the old English Constitution, whereby the powers are more rigidly separated, the branches of government, so that people have at least the chance to elect the head of government, the head of state. In Australia, the head of government is always the leader of the majority in parliament. And if the parliament becomes oligarchical, as it is what it has become in Australia, then the head of the, and that must be a bit ironic here, of the criminal organization, the group that has the majority in parliament, actually sends his mates and he himself as to be the heads of the government, especially, of course, the premier and the prime minister, who end up even appointing the head of state, because after all, we know that the premier and prime minister, they here in Australia make the final decision regarding who is going to be the governor and the governor general. So here in Western Australia, the premier appointed the vaccine commander. So the chief enabler of all this oppression here is now chosen by the premier to be the new governor of Western Australia. And similar situation is what happening in Queensland when the chief health advisor was appointed or rewarded by the premier to be then the new governor. So, you know, this is not working, and there is no proper checks and balances and separation of powers. It's something that must be addressed.
So it's an interesting thing, because there's always a question in the United States and here: do you want more of the federal government or more of the state government? They use this separation for themselves and against us, because they toss the blame between if Scott Morrison wants the lockdown, but he doesn't implement it, he says it's up to the states. Mm. But if he wants a travel ban, he says, oh, it's up to the federal government. So they're playing both ends, and they never accept accountability or blame for anything.
The point is that there are also unintended consequences of measures that can be adopted, we should have taken a more holistic approach. We don't know how many lives have been destroyed as a result of these lockdowns, how many people have lost their livelihoods and perhaps even have committed suicide. The suicide rate has increased dramatically in this country. So it would be right and fair and just and Christian to protect the most vulnerable elements of our society so that they wouldn't be affected by this pandemic. But in the process of doing so, they were so unreasonable and so extreme that they destroyed the whole economy. And then you go to the city here in Perth, and you see the city has become a ghost town where many people who used to run a small business now are dependent on government assistance or aid in order to survive. So the unintended consequences is what concerns me, and also the lack of proper legality in these measures, because we have to make sure that we operate under the boundaries and the limitations of the rule of law, and this government acted in an arbitrary manner in violation of the Constitution.
Well, is there any hope within the given framework? And considering that, I would say that the population is still not awakened. Does it take just a few to change it, or what is it going to take?
I am very concerned about the current state of the nation because the checks and balances are not available. There is no proper separation of powers. Even judges are appointed by politicians in Australia, and there is no separation between executive and legislative branches. So the whole thing is paved and prepared for the rise of an elected dictatorship. And I think we already have an elected dictatorship in this country. We are no longer a proper democracy. We are more like an elected dictatorship, as I mentioned.
The Bible says in the last days, we will have a lukewarm church, a Laodicean church, a church of sleeping virgins. And I'm just calling on leaders, pastors, to please, take the words of Professor Augusto Zimmermann seriously, read his books. You've got a new book out called Deconstructing
Scomo. This is a book that previously was to review what the Prime Minister was doing, but now it's an account as to why he lost so miserably the last election. So it's a book to explain what happened for this demise. The demise of the Prime Minister is explained in this book. And I have another book with Professor Gabriel Moyes that is about COVID restrictions, emergency powers, and vaccine mandates from a rule of law perspective. That's published by Connor Court. If you want to know, and your listeners, anything about the unconstitutionality of the measures, the violations of the rule of law, this is the book that people should have access to better understand the reality of the facts. So, of course, if you have the knowledge, then you can actually know and be equipped to have an answer to the questions that someone might make.
This is from the Haaretz newspaper in Israel, and they're reacting to the fact that Australia, after 2 years of lockdown, has swung further left. So we Christians are friends of Israel. A pro-Christian, pro-Bible government would be a friend of Israel. And we've just seen a swing to the opposite. And you will see it always relates to morality, spirituality, and the nation of Israel, not about science. So they're using science as a cover to get all these young people into these, green policies and green parties. And yet the future is going to be a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. These people have a spiritual agenda that they're trying to push. So it's not good news for Israel, what's happening here. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And we cannot forget also that the Biden administration in America, Joe Biden as a president, is aggravating the problem. But when Scott Morrison was the prime minister, it was one of the first heads of state or heads of government, better saying, because he is the prime minister here, to congratulate Joe Biden on the day following the American election, when there was still a discussion about whether Biden had indeed been properly and duly elected the president of the United States. He was already congratulating Joe Biden. So that's the so-called Christian prime minister that we had, already sending a very strong message of support to the Biden administration. And Albanese is just following the process here, because he says that his government is going to be developing very close ties with the Biden administration. I just want to know why he wants to develop these close ties when he was so highly critical of the Trump administration. So that's not to favor the American people that he's going to be associated with the Biden administration, but probably to get the Australians also involved in these unnecessary wars that cost the lives of so many innocent people. So now we have this unholy alliance of the President of the United States together with the Prime Minister, objectively conspiring against the best interests of the free world.
It's really a collusion. He's already slated to go to Japan to meet with Joe Biden. It's not clear in our news and in the American news what Joe Biden is going to do in Japan, but the news in Japan is telling the people something big is about to go down.
Yeah.
So I really wonder what they're, as you say, conspiring. The agenda is going very quickly.
Indeed. And that's quite clear. I think only a blind person who can't see what's happening can be in this state of bliss ignorance. But bliss ignorance is a fallacy. The ignorant are those who suffer the most because they will perish for this lack of proper wisdom. We are going to face some difficult times. There's no doubt about that. And but we can have our conscience clear that whatever it happens, whatever it's going to occur in the future, at least you were a prophet, especially you behave as a prophet. You'll be inevitably vindicated. And more than that, I believe the Lord will faithfully reward you for the work that you are doing. We will have a very special place with the Lord when the time comes, because you will be told by the Lord that you are a faithful servant. And he's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. That's what we want to hear, the rest is not so important.
That's a great word, that the best thing we can do in this life is to live with a clean conscience. Exactly. And my part was to give the prophetic word out. Your part is to train up legal experts and give legal opinions. And we go to bed at night and we sleep well. Exactly. Even if enemies attack us, some people don't believe us, we get a good night's sleep. We wake up fresh with a clean conscience. That's worth more than gold.
I have written already 2 articles in the Epoch Times, as you know, about the next Brazilian election. And now I will write another one on the opposition, because I think it's important to explain that not only Bolsonaro is a good man trying to do the right thing, but the opposition is apocalyptic even, because the left in Brazil is a Latin American left. They are really old-fashioned Marxists. They are going to destroy the country entirely if they manage to be in power after the elections. We have to pray for Brazilians to be wise and to re-elect the Brazilian president. Also pray that there will be not so many frauds and the election is not going to be rigged.
When is the election?
October, the first round, but if any of the candidates do not obtain 50% plus 1 of the votes, then we need to have a second round with the 2 most voted candidates, which is actually excellent. I actually think we should actually elect the head of state in Australia. Rather than being an appointment by the premier and prime minister, why not to have the people voting for the head of state and giving them the head of the state the power that the queen or the king used to exercise prior to the creation of the Westminster system. So in the past, the king was the head of cabinet, but the Americans decided that the king should be elected by the people. That's why George Washington became the president. Washington actually was told to be a king, but he didn't like the idea. He didn't want to be called a king. So they told him that he would just be presiding that. But president is a very humble word. In the beginning, it was, not now. It simply means that the person is overseeing the process for 4 years, a 4-year period. And after that, he would have to give his position to someone else. But it was inspired in the role of the monarch in England prior to the Westminster system in the 18th century. So up to George I, the kings were the heads of cabinet, and they appointed the ministers who could be impeached by the parliament. And it's similar to the American model now. And who talks about this is Sir Henry Maine in his book, Popular Government. He talks about how the American model was inspired by the old English constitution of a king who actually rules and ministers who are not coming from parliament. So the ministers in America cannot be parliamentarians. It's the other way around, as you know. Mm-hmm. Much better system, much better. I actually think the American model is better than ours, but
How can we ever change it, though?
Yeah.
Who's going to vote for it?
We can change at state level even, if one day we manage to have a very conservative state, perhaps Queensland, making the decision of having the people electing the head of state rather than being appointed by the leader of the majority in parliament, we could have started at state level. There is nothing that prevents us to doing these tests in the states and then moving on to the federal sphere. For the amendments to the Australian Constitution to take place, as you know, we need to have a popular referendum, Section 128 of the Constitution. But at state level, including here in Western Australia, you only need a majority of votes in Parliament. So if you can have a majority of votes in Parliament, you can implement these measures. So, well, we have to have hope, but in the end of the day, it's what Franklin said about, I think a lady approached him and said, well, Benjamin Franklin, what do we have? Do you remember that? This lady approached Benjamin Franklin and said, what have we got after they drafted the Constitution? And then Benjamin Franklin answered, you have got a republic if you can keep it.
Yeah, thank you for your support. You're such a great friend, and we have a lot of good people like you that are fighting for Australia. I want to mention that you are part of the faculty of our End Time University. That's I think the best, the most practical online university for the end time. And we get people like you and other faculty who will give, our listeners the very best information to prepare themselves. So this is not to go hide out. We're very practical. And how can you be more effective in the kingdom, knowing that we don't have many days left, all right? And, all our finances, it ain't going to count for anything in the end. It's going to be a heap of ashes. So before hyperinflation sets in, I suggest support. Come and join End Time University. Come and support us as we expand. We're trying to get the word out more. We're trying to employ more and more people to help our ministry grow. So all of that takes finances. People say, if it's the end time, why bother doing anything? No, I think it's the opposite. If it's the end time, why live for the world? Why spend money on Netflix subscriptions, which I canceled already? It's no good. They're too woke. And we're sending the message to all these companies. Why live for the world at this time? Really pour your heart, pour your soul, and even pour your finances into supporting the kingdom of God, and stop supporting dead and dry churches. I've got people saying to me, they got family relatives that are just, they're because they're out of habit, they're tithers and they're givers. They keep supporting dead and dry churches that barely preach the gospel or even preach against the message of the Bible. We have no time left. We have no time left. Get ready. Become a real disciple of Jesus. Get spiritual discipline. It's not always comfortable to serve God, but that's what God has prepared us for. Jesus went to the cross to show us the way. It's not always going to be comfortable to be a Christian, and we're willing to accept the pain and the responsibility so that we can be his servants on this earth.